3, Infancy-Cognitive Development. So in this section, we're going to discuss an overview of cognitive development, the cognitive milestones in infancy, Piaget's cognitive development theory and the sensory motor stage, information processing, and language development in infancy. So an overview of cognitive development. Cognitive development is the processes such as perception, thinking, reasoning, and problem solving by which one comes to know and understand the world. During infancy, there's many cognitive milestones that take place. Some of these include things like in the second month, being able to pay attention to faces, recognizing people from a distance and following things with their eyes. This is primarily because their eyesight is getting better. And they start to cry and get fussy if they're bored or when an activity doesn't change. At 4 months, they begin to express their emotions. They reach for things with one hand, and their hand-eye coordination begins to develop. At 6 months, they begin to look around at nearby things. They try to get things that are out of reach due to curiosity, so problem solving comes into effect. And they begin to pass things back and forth between their hands. At 9 months, they begin to play peekaboo. They can pick up tiny things like cereal with their thumb and their index finger. And they look for things that were hidden. So theory of mind comes into play here. And then at 12 months, they start to shake, bang, and throw things out of curiosity. And they can find things easily. They remember where things were. So no longer out of sight, out of mind. They're able to point out the correct object when you name it. And they start to use things correctly, such as a brush or a cup for drinking. As for their language development, they begin to make cooing noises or gurgling noises, and they turn heads towards sound at 2 months. At 4 months, they begin to babble, and babbles with expression or mimic sounds that caregivers make. They cry. Their cries are different depending on their needs. At 6 months, they begin to respond to sounds by making own sounds. They respond to their name. They like taking turns with parents or caregivers making sounds. And they make sounds to show happiness or discomfort. At 9 months, they begin to understand the word no. They may even say the word no. Sounds may resemble words, and they copy sounds and movements of others and point at things. And at 12 months, they respond to simple spoken requests using simple gestures like waving or shaking their head. They have different tones when they're making sounds, and they say a few basic words and exclamations, and they try to repeat spoken words as well. So Piaget's cognitive development theory. So Piaget, his theory states that people really focuses on understanding how people think and understand. And Piaget says that there is a balance between schemas, what we know, and assimilation and accommodation so that we have equilibration. So Piaget claims that schemas are knowledge of what we have, and then assimilation is when we take information and we add it to what we already knew about something. Whereas accommodation is where what we thought we knew was incorrect, so we modify it based off of the new information. And equilibration happens when there's a balance between what we know and the new knowledge that we just gained. And Piaget claims that there are 4 stages of cognitive development: sensory motor, pre-operational, concrete operational, and formal operations. And for infancy, we're going to primarily focus on sensory motor. So from birth to ages 2, infants and toddlers use senses and motor skills, and they can know some items by name. They also know how to use items as well. And they also develop object permanence. And we're going to talk about all of this more in just a second. So the sensory motor stage. This is what I said is from birth to around age 2, and it's a way of understanding the world through senses. Babies use their senses for everything. They can see it, they can smell it, they can taste it, they can touch it, they can hear it. So they're very curious individuals. And during this age, they develop what is known as object permanence. A lot of babies will throw an object, and once they throw it, it's out of sight, out of mind, they forget about it. But there's something that happens, and they realize that this is a really fun game. And that's because they developed object permanence. So now that they know, well, if I throw it, it's not gone. It's still there. And I'm going to keep throwing it and have my caregivers pick it up, and I'm just going to chuckle and laugh about it because I know that that object is still there. So, object permanence is understanding that something exists even when it's not in sight or has been removed from vision. So, out of sight, out of mind, that goes away in infancy. And it's typically accomplished around 18 to 24 months. They're also, during this age, symbol users. So they can represent something with a picture. So if you say the word cat and you're looking at a book, they can point to a cat in the book. So they're getting that one-to-one correspondence with a picture and a word. Now, in sensory motor, there are 6 substages depending on their age. So the first substage is known as the simple reflexes, and this is the first month of life. And during this time, the infant is using a variety of reflexes that they used in their interactions with the world. So things like sucking, eating, those would be done in substage 1. Substage 2, these are the first habits and primary circular reactions. And this is from 1 to 4 months. And at this age, infants are beginning to coordinate what were separate actions into single integrated activities. So they're starting to learn, if I do this, this will happen. So an infant at this age might combine grasping an object and sucking on it at the same time, or staring at something and touching it. Substage 3 would be secondary circular reactions, which is from 4 months to 8 months. Now, during this period, infants take major strides in shifting their cognitive abilities beyond themselves. So they're starting to realize that there's more than just them, and they begin to act on the outside world. So an example of this would be a child repeatedly picks up a rattle and shakes it in different ways to see how the sound changes as they change their shaking mechanism. So they may shake it with their hand and then they may beat it on the floor to see the different things that happen. Substage 4 would be coordination of secondary circular reactions, and this is from 8 to 12 months. And in this stage, infants begin to use more calculated approaches to events. So they're really starting to understand how they fit in their environment. So they can coordinate several schemas to generate a single act. So if they're jumping in a toy, they know what's going to make that toy make the noise that they want it to do, or they'll know what button to push to make something happen. So an infant will push one toy out of the way to reach to another because they understand where it is as well. So they understand how to make certain things happen to get the result they want. So substage 5 is tertiary circular reactions, and that's from 12 to 18 months. And at this age, infants develop what Piaget calls as a deliberate variation of actions. They're very deliberate in bringing these desired consequences to happen. Before, some of it was just trial and error. They made it happen, and they were trying to figure out how to make it happen again, but they couldn't do it repeatedly every time. Now they're in what is deliberate. They know how to do it. So rather than just repeating an enjoyable activity, they will carry out many experiments to observe what will happen. So a child may drop a toy repeatedly from a position to see what will happen. So they may push a car or a toy down the stairs to see what happens, or down a slide. And then substage 6 is the beginnings of thought. And this is from 18 months to about 2 years of age. And this is a major achievement in mental representation or symbolic thought. And Piaget argued that only at this stage can infants imagine where objects can that they cannot see might be. So they're starting to realize, well, mom or dad or my caregiver took this away. Where did they put it? And they may go and try to find it. So there are some critiques of Piaget's theories. Well, first, his theory allows us to view infants' thought as unique from adult thought. However, Piaget does at times underestimate the cognitive abilities of infants. And his theory was based primarily on his observations of his own children. And it doesn't account for environment or diversity. He kind of says this is the common patterns that all children, regardless of race, ethnicity, geographical location, they should be able to do at these age stages in their development. So we're going to pause and process what we just discussed in regard to Piaget's theory. Information processing in infancy. So information processing is the computer model that we've discussed before. And it's the way in which we bring in information and we either forget the information, use it and put it into our working memory, or we put it into our long-term memory and we encode it and retrieve it as needed based off of our new experiences in our environment. So all of the processes are apparent at birth and are probably functioning at some point prenatally. So we have something known as association, which is the ability to form connections between a stimuli and a response. Babies learn these connections really early on. And a lot of this is due through crying and those adaptive mechanisms that they do to get what they need. So they learn automatically through association, if I cry, I'm going to have somebody come and take care of me. Recognition is awareness or recollection of having something before. So they also learn that if I do this, this is going to happen. So they start getting habits, which is an experimental technique that allows researchers to measure the recognition of babies. So they do start getting these habits. So researchers are really looking at how is the baby getting what they need. So looking at their awareness of, if I want something, am I going to throw a fit? Am I going to cry? What am I going to do? And then imitation is the basic process of a newborn being capable of immediately imitating your behavior. So something that may be imitated first is something like a smile or a laugh or clapping of hands. So infantile amnesia is focused on how infancy can be retained. So the skills and the conditions of the responses are remained, but our memories from infancy are not. So we remember how to crawl, walk, and things like that, but we kind of have this blank of memories from a certain period in time. And this is what is known as infantile amnesia. So implicit memories, they're unconscious memories that influence our behavior. So we remember learning how to walk and crawl and talk, but explicit memories, we may not remember them until we see pictures of them or we're reminded of these events. So we're going to pause and process what we have talked about so far. So go back and look at the slides as needed to answer these questions. So language development in infancy. So there are 5 components of language that we will talk about throughout this course. And phonics and phonology kind of go together. So the green and the blue here, which deal with speech sounds and phonemes. Morphology deals with words. Syntax deals with phrases and sentences. Semantics deals with the literal meanings of phrases and sentences. And pragmatics deals with how we use what we use in the context in which we speak. And we're going to talk about these a lot more in detail. So phonology and phonetics. Again, both of these can be described as the study of speech sounds. Phonemes are the simplest and most smallest building blocks of speech. It's the sounds. So if we kind of want to think about it, thinking about phonics sounds that we hear. Graphemes, on the other hand, are the written symbol that represents sounds. So when we're little, we may know apple, apple, but we don't necessarily know apple are the graphemes that make that word apple. Now, phonology are the system of sounds and combinations of sounds and patterns of speech sounds, whereas phonetics is the study of how speech sounds are produced. So the way that we move our mouths or where we put our tongue placement. So when we think about phonology and phonetics, we need to think about vowels, consonant, diphthongs, accents. And these are all things, again, that we learned when we were younger, but we seem to have this amnesia of how we learned that B goes b, 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 banana. Or going back to when we learned about rhyming, hat, bat. They rhyme because they both end in at, the AT. So going back and thinking about those fundamental things of building our language. And of course, when we were little, we were told these words and shown them with a picture. But later, when we got into kindergarten, first grade, we started to have to be able to sound these letters out on our own when we were reading. So the phonemes turned more into graphemes when we were reading out loud, because we were using the graphemes to say what the word was. Now, morphology is something that we still use a lot, and this is the understanding of morphemes and how they are used to construct words. Now, morphemes, whenever I think of morphemes or morphology, the word morph means to change. So it's what we add to a word to change it. So think about prefixes and suffixes. So the word accept is a root word here. But if we put un in front of it, it means not accept. And then if we put able and add the suffix to it, it makes it unacceptable. So looking at the different parts, but if we just have unaccept, it means I don't want it. But unacceptable is the action is unacceptable, or it's not worth accepting. So looking at the prefixes and the suffixes of how we change the words. But it's not just prefixes and suffixes. It can also be changing the endings of words. So you probably remember in elementary school, maybe even middle school, learning about past, present, future, and how we add things to words to change. Did it happen now? Will it happen? Or did it happen in the past? And all of this is part of morphology, changing words to change the meaning. Syntax is the rules for making grammatical sentences. So it's grammar, punctuation, and the order of words. Little kids, when they first learn about syntax, they'll say, me give, instead of give me. But they learn eventually that they have to flip their words to make it make sense. And they don't say me toy. They later learn my toy. But at first they say me get, my get, and then eventually they say I get. And that is all part of syntax, learning the grammar, the punctuation, and even the order of words. And again, things like punctuation don't really happen until later in elementary school. But grammar, depending on their experiences, they may come in with good grammar, or they may use words incorrectly based off of how people interact and talk back to them. So things like baby talk can mess up with their syntax. Same thing with the orders of words. If they're not reinforced by a caregiver saying a sentence correctly to them, they may always say things out of order. Semantics is the ability to express meaning through language. So these are things like figurative language and meaning, literal meaning, multiple meaning words, homonyms, homophones, homographs, heterographs, and heteronyms. Now, All of these, we have been familiar with these before, but we may not remember what some of these are. So, figurative language and meaning would be things like similes, metaphors. And little children may not understand what you mean when you're being sarcastic or when you say it's raining cats and dogs outside. They may literally go out and look because the ability to express meaning through language, they may take you literally and may not understand. Or you may say something like, we're going to go on a slide. Well, a slide could be a slide at the park, it could be a slide at a water park. Or I'm going to give him a ring. Well, you're going to give him a jewelry ring or you're going to give him a phone call. They may have trouble with the semantics of what you are saying. Pragmatics. This is the ability to adjust one's speech socially and in culturally appropriate ways. Sometimes this is referred to as code switching. So it's our ability to speak formally and informally depending on our context. So with our friends, we may say, like the girl in the picture, so I don't got no pencil, but you might could give me yours. That is not formally correct English. However, in a socially acceptable friend dialogue, that would make sense and you could say it that way. But if you were talking to the teacher, you wouldn't want to say it like that. You might want to say, I told him I didn't have a pencil, and then I asked if I could borrow his. That would be more appropriate for a formal conversation between people. But having the ability to be able to adjust that is known as pragmatics. And whenever I think of pragmatics, I think of problem. So if I do not adjust my speech correctly, it's going to cause pragmatics. It's going to cause a problem with somebody understanding me. So, the importance of language mastery. Well, again, if we go back to the physical development, 75% of brain development happens from birth to infancy. And then the rest of it is from there. Language is very important because it permits communication. It's way information is given, especially at the beginning of life, considering that they don't understand what words mean yet or what symbols mean yet. They're getting that understanding, but they're not quite there yet. So everything is done through oral communication or with pictures, but still with oral communication. Language also allows individual expression. So it's a way of expressing feelings and emotions, innermost thoughts, and connections to experience, personal connections. So it gives us a way of sharing what we're thinking and feeling, what we enjoy. It also permits learning to occur. It is the foundation for reading, listening, writing, and speaking. All of this builds on this language mastery at the beginning, understanding why we communicate, how we communicate, when we do this in different ways. However, it starts at the very beginning and then it moves to more abstract understandings. So let's talk about Chomsky and his study. So we talked about this back in the theory chapter about how he studied infants and language and how he assumes that children are born with a language acquisition device, an LAD, which allows them to create syntactic structures with the new words that they learn. And Piaget would support this as well, saying that they get information from their environment that goes into their language learning mechanism, which allows them to understand what we're talking about when we speak to them. Primarily, it's because we show them an object and we say things like cat or bottle. Can you say bottle? And they may say bubba, but it's a close representation for them to understand. So it allows them to discover language rules as they learn how to acquire language and to make meaning of these things that they're seeing. So there is a general sequence for language development in infancy. And it primarily starts with cooing and crying. So newborns cry, and then before too long, that crying turns into cooing, which is primarily a ooh or an ah. So it's a very vowel given sound. They also start with laughing, and then they have different cries for different situations. By 4 to 6 months, they begin to have syllables emerge. So ba, ba, ga, ga, da, da, mama. By 6 to 8, they start having a longer babbling. So they may say ba, 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 da, 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 da. So it goes from da to da, da, da. So they're adding on to it. And they have an attempt at imitating sounds. By 8 to 12 months, they start babbling in variables. So they may say ba, I do, ba. They may be saying baba, get da. Trying to say bottle, get dad. So it's more sentence-like. And then by 12 months, they start with their first words. So they may say mama, dada, baba. And sometimes baba sounds like they may just say ba at the beginning. So a holophrase is something that is very important to talk about as well. And this is an early speech form used by infants in which a single word may convey a wide number of meanings. So they may learn the word mama or juice. And mama could be mama, as in I need you, mama. I don't feel good, mama. I'm hurt, mama, depending on how they say it. Juice could mean I want juice, I need more juice, I spilt my juice. It could mean many different things to them, but they may articulate it as one word. And that's known as a holophrase. So that one word has an entire meaning of its own. So a couple of other things are errors in infant speech. During this time, they're developing their speech, so they may have something known as underextensions, overextensions, or overlaps in their understanding, in their schemas. So an underextension would be when a child limits the meaning of a word too narrowly. So you may ask a child, show me the balls, and they may point to the beach ball and the soccer ball, but maybe not to the pool ball. Well, one, they may have never seen this type of ball. Or two, these balls are kind of soft. This ball's kind of hard. So they may have softball in their head and not balls that are hard. They may think this is called something different. Or they may think that's an eye, since it has. An overextension would be when a child applies the meaning of a word too broadly. So if you said, show me the dogs, they may point to the cat. Well, dogs and cats, they're both furry. They both have 4 legs. They have a tail. They have ears. But that would be a time to talk about, this isn't a dog. This is a cat. And we know it's a cat because it has whiskers and it has claws. And an overlap would be when a word is overextended on occasions. So they may accidentally call this a dog, but then at other times they may call it a cat. So vocabulary and syntax development. Well, vocabulary, by their first birthday, they can speak an average of 3 words. By their second birthday, an average of 272 words can be spoken. That is a big jump. And it's primarily because they've had experience learning about their world. They're starting to get an understanding, and then they're able to talk. And when babies are more able to talk, people are more out to talk back to them. So they really start that interchanging of dialogue with others. And fast mapping is a language skill used by young children, and the meaning of a new word is acquired by comparing it to something that is similar. So that could be the example of the dog and the cat. They would be able to acquire what that word is and the differences based off of comparing it to what they knew. So that would be an example of an accommodation or an assimilation. So I knew this was a dog, but I thought it was a cat, so I had to change my understanding of what a dog was. but it may also reinforce, well, dogs do this and cats do this or look like this. Now, syntax is grammatical knowledge is connected to vocabulary development. So this is where the basic syntax rules come into play. Subject, verb. So they'll start saying, I want, me want. They may start off saying me want and eventually realize that that's not correct pragmatically and may cause some issues in being formal or informal, but they may change it later to I want, and then they would fill in the blank. And there's lots of ways of improving a baby's language development. Most importantly, talking. The more you talk, the more aware the baby is going to be of language and words. Same thing with reading, giving them books, asking them questions, babbling back to them. But again, making sure that we're very careful with that fine line with baby talk, because that can carry over and cause issues. So making sure that if they say something in baby talk, making sure that we may say it in baby talk to them, but then telling them what it really is called and having them imitate it. Singing and dancing with them, doing the name game, playing. There's lots of things, but most importantly, it's that dialogue back and forth. Because if you're never spoken to, it's kind of hard to learn new words. So we're going to pause and process what we have covered so far. So go back and review as needed to answer these questions. And that is the end of this section.